What is up, my car-loving friends? So, we've got a lot of work to do today.
Who's we? You got a turd in your pocket?
I'm gonna actually convert this car from a distributor to wasted spark, which is individual coils that fire in each cylinder. And I have no idea what I'm doing. I know that comes as a big shock for those of you who generally watch this channel, but I've never done this before.
He's being sarcastic.
But it is a big step in order for us to, add things on here that go woo woo and stuff.
That guy's hilarious.
But it is a big step in order for us to add pieces in here that go psh, psh.
There's something really wrong with him.
So we have to have wasted spark working, and you'll figure out what that is as we go along. So you know what? Let's just get into it. So here we have 6 coils. Each one of these are LS coils. That's what we're going to be using. And I have some wiring pigtails that I picked up. So these coils need to be wired so 1 and 6 are together, 2 and 5 are together, and 3 and 4 are together. So when cylinder 1 is on its compression stroke, cylinder 6 is on its exhaust stroke. But they will both fire at the exact same time. That's what wasted spark is. So it looks like a lot of complicated wire, but essentially there's one signal wire that comes from the ECU. There's one that goes directly to the ground on the chassis. Then there is another wire that goes to signal ground, and then there's another wire that provides full-time 12 volts to these coils. So the chassis ground wires can all be wired together, the power wires can all be wired together, and the signal ground wires can really all be wired together. It's really only the signal wire from the ECU that needs to be separated out for each of the different 3 banks. Once I finish wiring these up, I go ahead and use electrical tape to make them look a little better. Then I make sure to label everything so I remember what it is when I get it out to the car, wrap it up, and now we're ready to install it. The next thing I have to do is, because we are not using a standard operating procedure piece of the ECU, we have to go ahead and wire up this plug here, which is a 26-pin options plug that you use on your Megasquirt. And it didn't make sense to just wire up the wires I needed. I went ahead and wired the entire piece and just labeled every wire so that if I wanted to use anything or add any additional sensors or something like that later, well, it would all be wired up properly. Now our wasted spark coils are going to sit on top of our valve cover, so we're going to have to go ahead and remove our intake system here. And we're going to go ahead and remove all of the spark plug wires. And remove this set of spark plugs off of our distributor that's on the front of the engine. Now needless to say, they don't make a set of spark plug wires for this car, so I'm going to have to create them myself. First, I'm going to go ahead and install the bracket that's going to hold these coils on here just to make sure it fits properly. Then we're going to try to install the coils on here. And as it turns out, it's a lot easier to install these coils when you take the bracket off the car. I only learned this, of course, after dropping 3 or 4 of the nuts that actually screw onto this. Now I was going to attempt to just put the proper ends on the spark plug wires, so I picked up a spark plug wire kit and installed the ends on here that should have connected to these LS coils. Shockingly, they didn't. So I had to move on because I didn't have the proper ends for the coils to taking off our distributor. Needless to say, the distributor is wedged up against the fan and the radiator, which makes it a whole heck of a lot of fun to take off. And to top it all off, this whole entire thing was leaking like a sieve. We just had oil basically running right out of it. Inevitably, I removed the fan shroud and then decided that I needed to just go ahead and take the radiator out if I was going to get this thing off.
Say what now?
That made it a lot easier to get to the bolts that hold on the distributor, but I also had to take off the timing chain cover at the top to reseal it so that it wasn't leaking ridiculous amounts of oil. And in order to get that off,
There it is again!
of course, we have to take off the valve cover. Now, one of the things that I want you guys to realize is that the absolute best way that you should work on a greasy, oily car is in a white shirt. It is just what you should be doing. Now we just have to bash off the top cover, and there we go. Alright, so here is the upper timing chain cover, all cleaned off. And because we're not putting a distributor back on, we got this right here. This is from E28 Goodies. It's a nifty little milled part, and they made some sort of half-assed attempt to actually polish it pretty unsuccessfully, but I don't care. It looks like it's going to serve its purpose. So we are going to go ahead and put that on here, but we're not going to take the chance that it's going to leak, so we're going to use some of this right here and make ourselves a little gasket so that we can put this on and be sure it doesn't leak. Now, we don't need the camshaft key or anything on here anymore because it's not going to drive the distributor. However, we do have a little bit of a seal here, and it seems like it makes sense to go ahead and put that key on again, if for no other reason than to keep as much oil out of this area as possible, since it doesn't really have any sort of drain or anywhere to go. So we're gonna put the key back in, and then we're gonna gasket this up to keep it from leaking. So let's do it. Alright, so this says to put a bead around everything.
Stick that into the crack and then put your caulk on, and we want to make sure we fill that.
And we're going to use this on the timing cover gasket as well, so we're not going to waste it on this little gasket alone.
The first thing you need to do is you need to cut off the tip. You take a nail or a piece of wire or something and get that in there so it's ready to go.
Alright, so now it says we're supposed to put this on, and they want us to hand tighten the screws until we see it start to kind of bubble out. So now that we've got it kind of bubbling out, we just leave it for an hour and then tighten it down fully. See you in an hour. So what I'm going to do is we're going to make our own gasket down here and along here and along here, because this was just spraying oil out everywhere. So there's already a gasket in here. It's the extension of the head gasket, but this location right here, and there is a gasket on this side too, but this location right in here is just a known problem spot. So we're gonna fix that with some gasket stuff. And I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna use a little bit of gasket RTV type stuff to put this in here so it sticks, so we don't have to worry about it moving as well. So let's start with that. What I'm gonna do is just put some gasket material stuff on here, spread it out, and then stick it into place.
You must be joking.
Alright, so we've got this gasket all covered in sticky gasket material.
Now that's what I call a sticky situation.
Should be able to stick it on here and be relatively confident that it's just gonna stay where we put it. So now I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put gasket material on here and then on here, and then I'm gonna put it on there. Just seems like the most sensible way to go.
1 hour later.
All right, that should theoretically take care of all of our problem areas. Well, now we have to set it on and hand tighten the bolts. So let's do that. Hopefully our little gasket trick worked over there so that our gasket will stay where it's supposed to be. No gaskets hanging out on this side. No gaskets hanging out on that side. So it looks like our gasket stayed on. So I kind of whacked it on here.
You sure about that?
And what I'm going to do is just drop these bolts in where they're supposed to go. Make sure everything lines up.
A few moments later.
Alrighty, that bolt's not seating.
Again! Again and again and again.
Alright. Looks like got him. That one started.
Let's get it started.
Alright, so we have all the bolts started. We're going to let this sit for an hour and then torque them up.
1 hour later.
Alright, it's time to torque this up. We'll start with the ones on the bottom here.
Later.
Okay, so these two wires right here are gonna go to the ground. So I already have them ringed up. And the ground for the car is right here. So it's gonna connect up with all the other grounds. These two are the power wires for our coils. And they are gonna go into this loom right here so that they have power. And all the rest of the wires go to the ECU, and they're over there. And that's pretty simple. You got signal ground, you've got the trigger wire for the A, the B, and the C bank. Pretty simple stuff. Okay, so this is the options harness. It has 26 pins. Right now, none of these I'm going to use, but these 4 pins here, signal ground, spark B, spark A, and spark C. We're going to use those. So we've got spark A here in yellow, and we've got spark B here in blue, and then we've got this one here is spark C, and then this one is the ground, signal ground. So we just have to wire these in, plug it into the ECU, and we're all set. All right, so we've got the new tune. AFR's ready to go. Well, it definitely started, and I definitely hear the coils ticking. Let's give them a quick feel. Make sure that they're not running hot or anything. No, coils feel fine. All right, let's try it again. Just like to wait until my AFR sends its signal, and then we're ready to go. Well, it sounds like we're getting somewhere. It's just some significant timing problem.
I know. My timing is off.
So we'll get that fixed and we should be good. So we got our wasted spark up and it ran really badly. So we're just kind of testing some things. So right now I have us in test mode here in Tuner Studio, and we are testing coil A, which should be spark plug 1 and 6, to see what happens. So basically, got some extra spark plugs over here. This is coil 6. You want them to be touching metal. That might work. So we got there and there, and what we're gonna do is we're just gonna go ahead and start our test on these coils. And we got spark there, and we got spark there. So those appear to be functioning as intended. Coils are not hot. It's good. Let's try the next two. Okay, so now we've got coil 5 and coil 2 in plain, because of course, why not? We're going to change this from coil A to coil B, and we're going to click start here. Got good spark there, and got good spark there. 2 down, 1 to go. All right, there we go. We've got 3 and 4. And these should be wired to coil C. Both are firing exactly as intended. So it appears that we should be wired properly. Okay, so now we have number 3 and 4 disconnected and hooked up to some plugs. So we just have to go over here into our tuner studio and configure it for coil C and start. And there we go. We are getting good spark on both of them. So it definitely seems like we have everything wired. They're doing what they're supposed to do. Alright, so we still don't have it running very well on wasted spark, and we think we might know the problem. So I've got a big mess going on here. We think that the injectors wired in batch were causing a problem with what we were doing. So we're going to wire our injectors in wasted spark, basically, or what is called semi-sequential firing. And what that means is cylinder 1 and 6 fire with these coils, and those coils fire at the same time. Well, cylinder 1 and 6 injectors will be on the same line as well, so they'll fire at the same time. Semi-sequential. Currently, at the moment, 3 fire and then another 3 fire, which ends up we have fuel in one of the holes that shouldn't have it, and it's causing the problem, or at least that's the theory. So I have written down here how we're going to wire this up. Now obviously there are 2 wires for this already going to the ECU. So 18 or 17 is A, so that would be 1 and 6, and that is blue, brown and yellow. So that's this wire right here. And then 16 is B, and that's blue and white, or excuse me, brown and white. And that right here, here's brown and white. And then C is already in the ECU down below. So we just have to wire up 2 injectors for C. So A is going to be 1 and 6, B is going to be 2 and 5, and C is going to be 3 and 4. So basically, we're going to have to cut the 3 and 4 and wire them up with a new wire that's going to go to pin 5 on our ECU. And then we have to reorganize these so that blue and yellow is getting 2 of them and blue and white is getting 2 of them, and they have to be in the correct holes, which is basically what we're going to do here. Now each injector, as you can see here, has 2 wires. So this one is a blue and yellow wire right here going out, and then a red and white wire. All the red and white wires, you can see they're going in here. We're not even going to touch the red and white wires because that is constant power. So we don't have to mess around with any of that. The only thing we're going to be touching is the second wire, the wire that fires it. So 2 of these are going to be cut and added to the C bank, and the other ones are going to be put in the proper holes, so we're all set and we don't have to rewire that. So really, if we're being honest, we're only going to be running 1 wire from the ECU, and we're going to be connecting it to 2 of these plugs, and that's it. Pretty simple. So I'm going to get to it. Alright, so we've got our A's, which is the brown and yellow wires stuck in the A holes, 1 and 6. So this is 1, this is 6, and we've got our B's, which is the brown and white stuck in the B hole, which is 2 and 5. And that leaves these last 2 right here, and we're going to cut the brown and yellow and the brown and white wire. We're going to wire it to this third one, which is going to be C, and it's going to go into 3 and 4. So all we have to do is make these 2 wires connect to these, and then wire it up on the other end at the harness, and we have semi-sequential fuel. There we go. And of course, all this stuff is going to go back in this case here. We didn't add anything but 1 wire, and I removed lots of wires from here, so I know this is all going to fit inevitably. But before we put any of this cover back on or connect up our wires, I want to go ahead and connect it at the ECU and then test it out and make sure that we're testing the right wires and all that stuff. So let's do that. Okay, so what I've done is I've liberated pin 5 injector C from this bundle of unused wires right here. And I labeled everything, but I'm not gonna, I'm gonna trust but verify. So we're gonna strip this wire, and I'm gonna verify that it is actually pin 5, and then here is our wire. Once we verify it is pin 5, I'm gonna go ahead and connect these 2, and we'll have our third bank of injectors wired up and ready to go. And then the only thing that I need to do after that is just go ahead and check that all the injectors are on the proper bank and firing properly, and I'll show you how to do that when we get there. So let's connect this up. Okay, so our wire right here has now been verified and connected, and inevitably we'll make it part of this harness, of course, but for now we're just getting stuff wired up. So we're gonna go ahead and test to make sure the injectors are in the proper holes and they're doing what they're supposed to do on A bank, B bank, and C bank. So I just got to get this all plugged back up, and you can see it is a tight fit in here. So there's a lot of wires in a very small space. Let's get it wired up. First thing I'm going to do is verify that all of our injectors have power. So we just got to go off power input here, and boom. So we've got power there, power there, power, got power, got power, got power. Now we want to test to make sure they're firing.
Do we have to?
So I'm pretty sure it fires a 5-volt signal. So that would be, if we go to our secondary wire, this should basically just ground the signal when the injectors are set to fire. So what I'm going to do is put it in a test mode, and we're going to check to make sure that they're firing properly in that test mode. Alright, so what we're going to do here is we're going to go into our CAN bus test modes. And we're going to go to test injector and spark. And what we're going to do is we're going to enable test mode. We want to make sure our coil testing is off. We're not going to do anything with the fuel pump here because we're not physically testing the injectors. We're just testing that they're test firing or firing. We've got our injector channel set to test 1, or injector 1, which should be banks 1 and 6. We're going to put this on to 1. So 1 and 6 should fire at the same time. Obviously we can only test 1 at a time, but we're going to go ahead and click start, and we're going to see what we get here. So we're going to go to injector 1. We're going to get our brown wire here, and we're going to put this here, and we can see it doing something. So we see a pulse going back and forth there. Let's see if we get the same thing in number 5. I'm pretty sure we won't. So we're going to go here and here, and we get nothing there. So we're good. We're good. We know that 6 is doing something. Let's check 1. Yep, 1 is pulsing and doing the same kind of thing. So it's doing something. And we'll test 2 just to verify. Nothing. Let's test 3 just for fun. 3 is getting a signal, but it's not fluctuating. 4 is getting a signal, but it's not fluctuating. And I'm pretty sure that's what you want. So it begs the question as to why we're not really getting any signal here on 2 and 5. Just a nominal. Let's try bank 2 and 5. Alright, let's see what we get here. Okay, so we're still getting fluctuation. It's just different. We may end up having to rewire this one. Alright, so we're definitely getting the fluctuation on that one. Let's try bank C. It doesn't look like it's doing anything. Let's try it again.
Many hours later.
Well, with the short bit of testing that I did, it appears that everything is wired up properly. I'm a little concerned that banks 2 and 5 are getting a super weak signal. I'm not sure why that is, but they were functioning before. So we're going to kind of just see what happens when we try to fire it over. And if we have to pull the injectors to test them, that's what we'll do. Or maybe rewire B. But let's button everything up, get the injectors plugged in, put the intake on, and see what happens. Okay, so further testing. Channel C is not firing. It's still firing in batch. So there are a bunch of jumpers in here, and I have the jumper settings right here, and I'm relatively certain that we have to go in here and move a jumper to activate the C bank. So let's do this.
What's in the box?
Here are all our jumper settings right over here. They actually show you jumper setting layout right there. So we've got to kind of take a look at what we have, figure out why C is not active. So right now, port 7 right here says that 1 injector controlled by C is nothing. 2 injectors controlled by C needs the jumper. Right now there's nothing. So we're gonna go ahead and put that jumper in there and see what happens. Now these are super, super tiny. They are not easy to get on, and they're definitely not easy to see. So we're gonna try to use this little light here, and let's make sure we're in the right spot. I believe we are. And of course, we have to work around this as well. So there we go. I believe that is correct. Yep, that looks like it's the right thing. One down. So next is 11. And right now it's set to 3 injectors controlled by channel B. But we want it to set to 2 injectors controlled by channel B. So we have to remove this top one here. So that shouldn't be too hard.
That's what she said.
All right, so that looks proper. That's set up the way it's supposed to be. All right, so we've got one more here. We've got to change this one. And this is for injector A. All right, so this one has 2 jumpers. I'm gonna remove, I did take the plate off here. We're gonna remove those 2 jumpers, and we're gonna put the jumper right here, which is for 2 injectors firing on 2 injectors firing on there. So we're pretty good there. Okay, so I think we've got all the jumpers in their proper locations. At least that's what I'm hopeful. Put this back on, get it all buttoned up, and test it again and see if those fire. All right, so we re-jumpered the box. We're gonna go ahead and enable test mode. We want our fuel pump off. And we are going to be testing down here. So we want to know if injector C is working. So we're going to enable test mode, turn our fuel pump off. We are going to select 1, and we're going to go to injector C, and we're going to click start and see if these click. And once again, we have nothing. No injector clicky. So whatever we just did, that didn't fix it.
You blew it, boy! You really blew it!
If we change this and we go to injector B or 2 and we click start, we can hear the injectors. This is going to be 2, this one here, and this one here, and you can go and physically feel them doing their thing. So we know that's working. We just don't have injector C. There's nothing going on there. So we didn't fix our problem yet. So what I'm going to try doing now is we're going to wire these into our option ports. So, you know, instead of using the main harness, they'll be wired onto the option port. And so we've already got injector 1 wired up. And injector 1 also connects to this, which is a part of this little system here, which makes our miles per gallon dial and everything else in the car work. So I want to keep that working. So that's connected to injector 1, and now it is a part of this harness. So now we just got to do injector B and injector C.
Say what now?
All right, we got A, B, and C wired up. All right, we're gonna give it another shot here. We're gonna go to CAN bus test modes. We're gonna go to ignition spark. We're gonna enable and turn the fuel pump off. We're gonna go to injector testing. And we're just gonna start with injector C and see what happens. And we still got nothing. Alright, so we still have injector 2 working.
Gotcha, bitch.
And we still have injector 1 working.
I can't believe you fell for the oldest trick in the book. What a goof. What's with you, man?
But we got nothing on injector 3 or C. We still got to figure it out. So when I tried to do some timing here to figure out what might be going wrong with the setup, I noticed that we had what I would call inconsistent firing, timing. They were still firing on every rotation, but the timing was off. And if you notice, these wires run directly past all of the injectors and this, which produce a lot of electromagnetic energy and could theoretically be adding noise into these lines that could be causing our problem. So what I'm going to do is use this copper tape to shield these wires as best I can to try to eliminate the extra noise. So we'll see how this goes. So what is the premise behind this whole ordeal? Well, we're basically creating what's called a Faraday cage around each of these wires. So basically you have a ground wire that is connected to all this metal shielding, which will conduct electricity, but it basically shields these wires from electromagnetic pulses. And we got a lot of them. Each one of these produce an electromagnetic pulse. This produces an electromagnetic pulse. Every one of the fuel injectors under there produce an electromagnetic pulse. These relays along the firewall produce electromagnetic pulses. And if any of those electromagnetic pulses are interfering with any of the actual signals that are coming in, it could theoretically cause it to misfire or cause it to not fire at the proper time. So all we're really doing is shielding these wires as best we possibly can from all that electromagnetic interference that could potentially get into them. I'm not doing the power wire or the grounding wires because they're not necessary, just the signal wires. So hopefully this will make the signal much more clean and easy for our coils here to figure out. But this is all in theory, and I don't know that this is causing our problem, but it doesn't cost me anything to do this, just takes a little bit of time. So why not go ahead and do it and see if we can't solve our problem.
Several months later.
So if you watched my live stream, you got a little bit of a sneak peek of what we're going to do to the BMW over here. We're going to turbocharge it. But in order for us to turbocharge it properly, we really need to get the wasted spark to work. Now, if you're not familiar with what wasted spark is, it's basically individual coils firing at each cylinder. The reason why it's called wasted spark is because our ECU output only has provisions for 4 sparks. So that means that in this particular case, we're going to have to use 3 of those outputs, and 2 of the sparks are going to be wired to each output. So when cylinder 1 is on the compression stroke, cylinder 6 is on the exhaust stroke, and there will be an actual detonation, or the spark will fire on that stroke, but it's wasted because obviously it's expelling the exhaust.
Stroke, stroke, stroke.
So that's what wasted spark is. It gives us a lot more ability to tune the car because we can control when it actually sparks. unlike a distributor, which is going to spark no matter what happens every single time it goes around. So that is kind of the plan. We really need to have wasted spark working. So the big problem with the way that I went with wasted spark, let me show you on the car. I decided to go with LS coils, and as we know, they mount right here on the valve cover. Now, that's fine. That's a decent place for them to mount, but the intake normally comes over here and then goes down here. And that's obviously not going to work because the coils are right here. It's also not going to work because the turbo manifold puts our turbo right here. And so you can't route your intake where your turbo is going to go. Obviously, the intercooler is going to go basically down here, out here, and then it's going to run up on the other side and into our intake. So in order to get wasted spark working, we're going to do the intake side first. We're going to build an intake to go out here, and we're going to put our air filter over there so that we can get the wasted spark working and have everything in here. Now, a couple of things that need to be added to the intake. We've got our idle control valve right here. So this is somehow going to have to connect to our intake. And we have our vent right here, which goes from our valve cover, and it has some vacuum. And that is going to have to go into our intake as well. Then we have our air temperature sensor, which also has to go into the intake. When they send you this generic stuff, you've got to figure out how to put all that stuff where it's supposed to go.
I'll tell you where I'd like to stick it.
Now, the other major problem with running our intake over that way, as you can see, is that giant battery that's in the way. So the intake will come out here and then go over there, but it can't go through the battery. So the battery is going to have to be relocated probably to the spare tire well in the trunk, since we're not using those tires. So it's a good place to mount it. You won't even see it. It'll be right under the carpet. I'm not going to actually do all the wiring to move this in this video. I'm just going to set up the intake down here, and we'll probably just put our air filter here for right now. But we're going to set that up first, and then we'll worry about moving this battery. But for now, we got to take it out. Look at this. Everything is in. All of our coils are in. Finalized. Everything is functioning. We even have our distributor replaced. Our new intake is good. It's on there. It's functioning. Our idle control valve is bad. We are going to replace that today, hopefully. But this works. Finally. And the problem was timing. You get the right timing, shockingly, it works pretty good. So, of course, we still have all this spaghetti just laying here. And we're gonna get all this tied up, I promise. You're not just gonna leave it messy. And, you know, it's gonna be a thing that happens. But got a couple of things we gotta finish up just yet. The car gets its tachometer signal from the coil. And as you can see, we no longer have a coil. So the tachometer is not working. However, the ECU has a tachometer output. So what we're going to do is wire that up and see if we can't get our tachometer to function properly again.
You sure about that?
And hopefully by then, when we're done, we'll have a new idle control valve.
Well, you think what you want about me. I'm not changing. I like me.
Well, everything is back in place, and the cables are mostly temporarily routed, but they're in there. We've got some other stuff to do. We have a new idle control valve in here, and this is run pretty much the way that I want it. And we started it up. Wasted spark is working perfectly. The idle control valve is finally working perfectly. The thing is running fantastic. The final tune is not in, and mostly that is because, well, we're gonna have to tune it again. And I'll explain why in a minute. But first, we probably need to talk about the full process of getting this up and running, because I think it's kind of interesting. Now, every project is going to have its challenges.
Right.
Absolutely. And the wasted spark piece of this project fought me and my tuner Joe every step of the way, and I have to thank Joe big time for his incredible patience. Now, he's been through stuff like this before, but I haven't. So I certainly panicked and asked a lot of stupid questions at every step of the way, trying to figure out how to get this to work. So at one point we had basically every jumper setting in the ECU changed. We had all the wires tested, all the wires checked. I probably pulled the system off, checked it 5 or 6 times. I must have run through the test sequence for the actual firing of the coils like 100 times. We literally spent almost 3 months trying every single possible thing that we could think of. And there is a point where you just get too close to the project and it's overwhelming. And it did get to the point where if I didn't just drop it, Joe and I might not actually still be friends.
Oh, wow!
And I didn't want that to happen. So there was an actual point where I just pulled Wasted Spark off the car totally, put the distributor back on, and started driving the car around. It is summer, and I do want to use it.
This is summertime.
And after giving it a week or so to just simmer down, I contacted the actual ECU manufacturer, the owner's Megasquirt, and asked for some information. I wanted just exactly what settings needed to be in the ECU jumper-wise, and any other information that they could give me that maybe there was something I had done wrong. So we started working through the process with them, and next thing you know, we find out that basically it's just that when you have the distributor on the car, well, it's going to fire on every single cycle, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the cycle where each cylinder is at. So it turns out that our timing of our toothed wheel was off by 120 degrees. So instead of 157, it ended up being 37. And the second that I changed our tooth wheel timing to 37 and had all the right settings in the ECU, the thing fired right up and ran perfectly. It took a really, really long time to get there, and the amount of frustration was just ridiculous. And those of you out there might be saying, well, why didn't you just put a timing light on the thing and try to figure it out? Well, I actually spent 2 or 3 days trying to get a timing light to work properly. You can't see the timing marks in this car, so of course I had to actually move the mark somewhere else where I could try to get the timing, and since it wouldn't run properly, we could never just see the timing marks and get the timing proper. It was just a disaster all the way around. So eventually we did figure it out, and I'm really thankful that we did. But you're going to run into points in your project where you just want to give up. It doesn't feel like anything is going to happen. You're not moving forward. And that's how cars end up sitting in garages for 25 or 30 years. And you don't want that to be the situation for you. So please, when something like this happens in your project, take a step back. Sometimes we're just too close to the actual problem. If you could take a step back, maybe pull something off, drive the car, go out, find something else to do for a couple of weeks, but in the back of your mind, just keep, processing it. And you come up with different thoughts and different ideas, and you can ask different people. The forums are out there for everyone. And believe it or not, even on a car like this where it feels like we're the first ones ever doing it, someone out there tried to do it. Someone out there has the knowledge that can help you to get to the finish line. So take a step back, calm your nerves, let yourself relax a little bit, and then jump right back into it with a fresh head, and you'll probably solve the problem. And if not, then find some people who can help you solve the problem. That's the real way to go about it, and that's what we did with Wasted Spark, and I'm really thankful we did, because the next project is gonna be awesome. But why would I go and spend all this time, energy, and ridiculous sums of money on an old beater like this that's really not worth anything?
Not this again!
It can only be for the love of cars. And if this moron can figure out how to do stuff like this, I know you can too. So go out there, find that car that you always wanted, pick it up super cheap and get it back on the road. And I'll see you guys in the next video.